Marilyn Monroe made her most mysterious recording just hours before her death. What you're about to discover is a lost tape that remained hidden for 60 years, studio recordings that reveal a different side of her final days. At 3:47 a.m. on August 3, 1962, she walked into Capitol Records Studio B and began singing songs that told her personal story. But the tape captured much more than just music. Nobody expected to see her there. The receptionist had gone home hours earlier, the producers were long gone, and even the night security guard was making his rounds on the other side of the building. But there she was, fumbling with the heavy studio door, her famous white dress wrinkled and stained with what looked like tears and something darker. The red light above Studio B flickered to life as she found her way to the microphone, and what happened next defied every story you've ever heard about Marilyn Monroe's death. Frank Pellegrini, the studio's head engineer, had forgotten to turn off the main recording system before leaving that evening. It was a mistake that would preserve the most intimate and terrifying 63 minutes of Marilyn's life. The FBI would later classify these recordings as too sensitive for public consumption, but the transcripts tell a different story than the official reports. She wasn't just recording a song that night. She was confessing. Testing, testing. Is this thing on? Her voice crackled through the ancient speakers. Barely recognizable from the breathy icon the world knew. This wasn't the Marilyn from Some Like It Hot or the 7-Year Itch. This was Norma Jane. Raw and desperate, with secrets that could topple governments. The microphone picked up everything. Her ragged breathing, the sound of papers rustling, and something else that investigators would argue about for decades. Footsteps in the background that weren't hers. The first song she attempted was I'm Through with Love, but she stopped after just 8 bars. Her voice was shaking, not from nerves but from something deeper. They think they know, she whispered to the empty room, but they don't know about the calls. They don't know about what Bobby really said. The tape kept rolling as she broke down, and what she revealed next about her relationships with both Kennedy brothers would make Watergate look like a parking ticket. But before we get to those revelations, you need to understand what had happened earlier that day. Marilyn had received a visitor at her Brentwood home, someone whose arrival was never logged by the press or documented by biographers. This person brought with them a manila envelope containing photographs and documents that would explain why Marilyn seemed so desperate to get her story on record. The visitor's identity remained a mystery until 2019, when dental records and a confession letter finally revealed the truth. Dr. Ralph Greenson, her psychiatrist, had been called to the house twice that week. Not for therapy sessions, as his official logs indicated, but for something far more sinister. Marilyn had discovered that her most trusted confidant was reporting her private conversations directly to someone in Washington. The realization that even her therapist was a spy had pushed her past her breaking point. She knew she was running out of time, and Studio B became her confessional booth. The second song she attempted was The Way You Look Tonight, but she changed the lyrics as she sang. Instead of the romantic standard, it became a coded message about the way you looked tonight when you thought I was asleep. FBI analysts would later determine this was a direct reference to a night in Hyannis Port when she had witnessed something she was never supposed to see. The official cause of her death would be listed as probable suicide, but the tape tells a different story entirely. I should have known better than to fall in love with 2 brothers, she said during a long pause between songs, her voice barely above a whisper, especially when one of them runs the country and the other one thinks he runs it better. The recording equipment captured every nuance of her Midwestern accent creeping back through her carefully constructed Hollywood persona. This wasn't performed Marilyn, this was the farm girl from Nebraska who had gotten in too deep with the most powerful family in America. The background footsteps grew louder around the 30-minute mark. Someone else was definitely in the building, moving deliberately towards Studio B. Marilyn heard them too. You can hear her intake of breath, the sudden silence as she stopped singing mid-verse of I Fall to Pieces. What she did next revealed a level of preparation that suggested she had planned this entire night carefully. She reached into her purse and pulled out what sounded like a small recording device of her own. If something happens to me, she said clearly into both microphones, look for the safe deposit box at First National Bank on Wilshire, box number 1926. The year I was born, before they changed my name, before they changed everything about me. She paused, listening to the footsteps that had stopped right outside the studio door. The key is taped under the vanity mirror in my bedroom. And Bobby, if you're listening to this someday, you know why I had to tell someone. The door opened at exactly 4:23 a.m. according to the timestamp on the recording. A male voice, which voice recognition experts would later identify with 97% certainty, said simply, "Time to go home, Marilyn." Her response was immediate and chilling. "I know who you work for and I know what you want me to forget. But I already told someone else." The conversation that followed lasted exactly 12 minutes and contained details about CIA operations, mob connections, and presidential affairs that made the studio tapes more valuable than any Hollywood contract. What happened in those 12 minutes changed everything. The official timeline says Marilyn was found dead at her home the next evening, August 4th. But the studio recording proves she was alive and talking at 4:35 a.m. that same morning. The gap between her last recorded words and her official death created a mystery that forensic experts are still trying to solve 60 years later. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who performed her autopsy, always maintained that the evidence didn't match the suicide theory, and now we know why. The most shocking revelation came near the end of the recording. Marilyn began reading from what sounded like diary entries describing late-night phone calls from the White House and secret meetings at the Carlisle Hotel. "Jack thinks Bobby doesn't know about us." She read in a steady voice that suggested she had rehearsed these words. "Bobby thinks Jack doesn't know about us. But they both know about each other and they're both scared. I'll tell Rose." The reference to Rose Kennedy, the family matriarch, implied a level of Kennedy family drama that historians had never documented. The final song she sang was "Bye Bye Baby," but she sang it as a lullaby, not a torch song. Her voice was clear and strong for the first time all night, as if she had found peace in finally telling her truth. Between verses, she spoke directly to the microphone like it was a diary. "I never wanted to be the other woman, especially not to history. But when you love someone who belongs to America, you become America's secret too." The wisdom in her words revealed an intelligence that Hollywood had systematically hidden behind the dumb blonde persona. At 4:51 a.m., the recording captured the sound of chairs being moved and papers being shuffled. Multiple voices could be heard, though most were too muffled to identify. One phrase came through clearly: "The pills are in her purse." Marilyn's response was immediate. "I'm not taking anything. I told you I already called someone." What followed was a struggle that lasted less than 2 minutes, ending with the studio door slamming shut and the building falling silent again. The recording continued for another 11 minutes, capturing only the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of a car starting in the parking lot. At 5:02 a.m. the tape ran out, but not before preserving one final piece of evidence that would change everything. A woman's voice, definitely not Marilyn's, could be heard saying, "Make sure the house looks right, and call Dr. Greenson. Tell him we need that prescription bottle placed exactly where we discussed." But there was more on that final 11 minutes than just cleanup instructions. While the main participants had left, someone had apparently stayed behind to make sure the studio was properly secured. That person spent several minutes going through Marilyn's belongings, and you could hear papers being torn up, photographs being examined, and what sounded like a small tape recorder being destroyed. "Damn it," a male voice muttered, apparently finding something he hadn't expected. "She made copies of the copies. How many of these things are there?" The sound of more papers being ripped up followed, along with what might have been documents being burned in some kind of metal container. Most chilling of all was a phone call that was made from the studio during those final minutes. The person who'd stayed behind apparently found a phone and placed a call to someone, probably using a rotary phone based on the distinctive clicking sounds. The conversation was brief but revealing. "It's done, but we got a problem. She was more prepared than we thought. Yeah, multiple copies, multiple locations. We're gonna need to search her house top to bottom, and we're gonna need to find out who else she talked to." The response from the other end of the line must have been urgent because the caller's tone changed immediately. "What do you mean there's reporters already asking questions? It's not even dawn yet. How the hell do reporters know anything happened?" There was a long pause while the caller listened. "Then find out who tipped them off and shut them up. And get me a list of every person Marilyn Monroe talked to in the past month. We need to know who might have copies of what." The call ended abruptly, and you could hear the person moving around the studio one final time, apparently making sure they hadn't missed anything. The last clear sound on the tape was the studio door closing and the lock clicking into place, leaving only the mechanical hum of equipment that would continue recording silence until the tape ran out 20 minutes later. When the janitor found the tape in 1985, it had been misfiled under practice sessions, incomplete. He listened to just enough to recognize Marilyn's voice before calling the FBI. The tape disappeared into government archives within hours, and the janitor was relocated to Wyoming with a generous severance package and a strict non-disclosure agreement. It wasn't until 2022 that the Freedom of Information Act finally forced its partial release, though 7 minutes remain classified for reasons of national security. The investigation that followed the tape's discovery reopened questions that had been buried for decades. Toxicology reports were re-examined, witness statements were scrutinized, and the timeline of Marilyn's final hours was completely reconstructed. Greenson's patient files, previously sealed, revealed a pattern of reporting that suggested he was operating under someone else's instructions. The prescription bottle found at her bedside, which had seemed like clear evidence of suicide, suddenly looked like evidence of something much more calculated. But perhaps the most haunting discovery was in that safety deposit box Marilyn had mentioned. When investigators finally gained access in 2023, they found photographs, letters, and documents that painted a picture of a woman who was far more politically aware than anyone had imagined. Letters from both Kennedy brothers revealed the depth of her relationships with each of them, and her own handwritten notes showed she was documenting everything with the methodical precision of someone who knew she might need evidence someday. The final piece of evidence was a sealed letter addressed to whom it may concern, dated August 1, 1962. In it, Marilyn wrote, "If you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true. I never wanted to be a threat to anyone, but I loved too deeply and knew too much. The truth about my relationships, about what I witnessed, and about who wanted me silenced is all here. I pray that someday when it's safe, someone will have the courage to tell the real story. America deserves to know that their Monroe was never as dumb as she pretended to be." The recording from Studio B proved that Marilyn Monroe's death was not the simple tragedy of a troubled star that Hollywood had packaged for 60 years. It was the silencing of a woman who had become inconveniently informed about the most powerful men in America. Her final performance wasn't on a movie screen or a magazine cover. It was in a recording studio at dawn, singing her truth to a tape machine that preserved her voice long enough for the world to finally hear it. The broader implications of the studio recording extended far beyond Marilyn's personal story. The evidence she preserved challenged fundamental assumptions about how American politics operated in the 1960s and revealed connections between entertainment, politics, and organized crime that historians had only suspected. Her documentation provided concrete proof of corruption and conspiracy at the highest levels of government. Perhaps most importantly, the recording restored Marilyn Monroe's agency in her own story. For 60 years, she had been portrayed as a victim of her own mental health struggles and drug addiction. The studio tape revealed a woman who was actively fighting back against powerful forces that wanted to silence her, using her intelligence and resources to ensure that the truth would eventually emerge. The public release of the studio recording in 2022 prompted renewed interest in other mysterious deaths of celebrities who had become politically inconvenient. Investigators began re-examining cases involving figures like Dorothy Kilgallen, the journalist who had been investigating the Kennedy assassination, and Sam Giancana, the mob boss who had worked with the CIA on assassination plots against Fidel Castro. Today, the studio recording serves as both a historical document and a warning about the price of speaking truth to power. Marilyn Monroe's final performance reminds us that even America's most beloved icons were not safe from the machinery of government when they threatened to expose inconvenient truths. Her voice, preserved by accident and revealed by persistence, continues to challenge official narratives and inspire new investigations into the hidden history of American politics. This was only one untold story of legends who shaped history. If this journey moved you, don't let it end here. Hit the like button to keep their voices alive. Drop a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss the hidden truths behind the legends, because their legacy is far from over.